Greetings and salutations. I had to just put this out real quick. I was reviewing testimony from the Senate Judiciary Committee yesterday. And I got to tell you, I know we all want to focus on our local government and hold them accountable, and it will make our lives better, and it will. The federal judges are what we're using to hold them accountable. So we must not be myopically focused on just our local government. We have to pay attention to what Congress is doing and what judges they are appointing to these benches. So I'm going to include two clips at the end of this, one from Senator Kennedy and one from Senator Blackburn, highlighting the terrible choices we're making in the federal bench right now. It's astonishing. Watch this.
I have made it clear that I will not support this nomination, and there is a good reason for not supporting him, Mr. Chairman. The White House really does not have a good record when it comes to this seat. Back in February, I voiced my opposition to Mr. Delaney, Michael Delaney, who was nominated for this very same seat. Well, Mr. Delaney, we found out, had used hardball tactics against a 15-year-old survivor of sexual assault. He did this in order to protect an elite private school that wanted to cover up the disgusting conduct that had been perpetrated against this young woman. Now, Mr. Delaney threatened to name, to shame, and to humiliate her by removing her anonymity if she had the audacity to come forward and tell her story. Now, fortunately, at least one of my Democratic colleagues had the moral clarity to join us in sinking Mr. Delaney's nomination. Now, after the Delaney debacle, you would think that the White House would have learned their lesson. And I thought they would have the decency to nominate someone who actually had a track record of protecting women and children, and it seems I was wrong. The president has chosen to nominate someone very similar to Mr. Delaney and his disregard for the well-being of children, and that is Seth Aframe. And I recently spoke on the Senate floor about this nomination, so I'd like to walk my colleagues through the two cases that Mr. Aframe prosecuted that automatically, in my opinion, automatically disqualify him from service on the federal bench. Now, in each of these two cases, Mr. Aframe recommended sentences far lower than the guidelines for heinous, unimaginable crimes against children. One of the defendants was guilty of unconscionable acts of sexual violence against a 14-year-old girl with a hearing impairment. This precious child was kidnapped. She was taken to an abandoned motel in Vermont, and she was raped. Despite all of this, despite what happened to this child, Mr. Aframe, as the prosecutor in this case, recommended a sentence far below the probation officer's suggested guidelines. It is clear that Mr. Aframe wanted a low sentence. And let me read you why. And these are his words. He wrote, and I'm quoting, "This low sentence will incapacitate the defendant until he is in his 60s. Hopefully by that time, the danger that the defendant presents will have subsided." End quote. Mr. Chairman, that is repulsive. It is disgusting. And you have a 14-year-old girl that was hearing impaired that was forced to go through this rape and this sexual violence with a man, and then you've got a judge who says, well, maybe by the time he's in his 60s, He will not want to do that anymore. That is disqualifying from someone to sit on the federal bench. What is a woman? What is a girl? What are they going to think when they go before this man? Now, the other case that I want to bring up, the defendant in the other case had created 6 videos of himself sexually abusing a 3-year-old girl. 3 years old. Now, many of us are parents and grandparents. I want you to think about this. Think about a 3-year-old girl being sexually abused, not once, not twice, not 3, not 4, not 5, 6 different times. 6. Think about this. This is a 3-year-old toddler. How many of you have 3-year-olds in your lives? I do. To me, this is repulsive. So let's talk about the sentence in this case. Well, Mr. Aframe decided he was going to recommend 60 years, but what was the sentencing guideline on this? It was life in prison. If he had given him life in prison, he wasn't going anywhere. He was locked up. 60 years, well, maybe the guy can get probation. So Mr. Aframe himself noted in the sentencing memo that he was asking for something lower than life in prison. When I pressed Mr. Aframe about this under oath on why he refused to recommend life in prison, he misrepresented the facts. So let me again set the record straight. The sentencing memo that Mr. Aframe wrote himself stated that the guidelines recommend a sentence of life in prison for raping this child. That, Mr. Chairman, is a fact. Regardless of what your staff is whispering in your ears, that is a fact. So I am going to ask my Democratic colleagues to join me in voting no on Seth Aframe. The man is morally unfit to sit on the federal bench.
Ms. Chairman, may I speak on this?
Judge, welcome.
Thank you.
You are probably the least productive member of your district court, isn't that right?
Well, I have not considered myself in those terms, Senator.
Well, let me explain what I mean. You have 125 motions pending that you've declined to decide.
Well,
Let me finish. That's more than any other district judge in the entire Seventh Circuit. In fact, you rank 7th highest nationally, do you not?
I am not familiar with those statistics, Senator Kennedy.
You haven't looked?
I did look in preparation for this hearing, but I didn't compare myself to others.
You haven't seen that you ranked the 7th, the worst in the country in terms of making decisions?
You are the first to tell me this. And I think for me, I stress the quality of my decision making. And as I explained, I came on, I was the first district judge to come on during this administration.
Yeah, but so were all the others. I mean, there have been 68 district judges confirmed in the 117th Congress. In terms of motions pending for more than 6 months, you rank number 3. You all came on at the same time. You all had the same problems with COVID. You're the third worst. You really think of all the other district judges in the Seventh Circuit, you're the one that ought to be promoted based on this record?
Senator, this is something that I've discussed with my fellow judges. Many of us new judges from...
Not you said you'd never looked at these statistics.
I haven't, these particular statistics I am not familiar with. But in terms of new judges, both from the current administration and the former administration, we are quite a collegial bunch, and oftentimes talk about the pressures of a new judge and the way reassignments work in our district, which is that you get, for example, 300 cases.
Yes, ma'am, I understand. I'm familiar with the procedure in federal court. Here's what I'm trying to understand. Why is your record so bad?
Well, I don't view it that way, Senator. When I look at the quality of my decision-making, the feedback that I get from parties,
Of course parties are not going to criticize you. They want you to rule in their favor.
I understand, Senator Kennedy.
I mean, that's just the way it works. Help me understand why you have such an abysmal record in moving cases. I mean, it costs a lot of money to litigate, and people are paying lawyers, and time is money. And of all the district court judges in the Seventh Circuit, you're the worst in terms of moving cases. Why do you think you deserve to be promoted over all of those others?
So, Senator, again, I'm not familiar with the statistics, but I stand by my record and that I give parties what they need. I think, I am regularly in my courtroom. I am regularly issuing decisions. I just came on at a very difficult time where there was a backlog in the courts.
So did everybody else. Let me ask you, when you were a partner in your law firm, you volunteered to write a brief on behalf of the Brady Center. You wrote the brief, and this is what you said. You volunteered for this. You weren't being paid. Is that right?
This was a pro bono case that one of my partners brought in, yes.
You said, quote, assault weapons may be banned because they're extraordinarily dangerous and are not appropriate for legitimate self-defense purposes, close quote. Tell me what you meant by assault weapons.
Thank you, Senator Kennedy. Just to clarify there, I was local counsel. Our Supreme...
Yeah, but you wrote the brief. Tell me what you meant by assault weapons.
Senator Kennedy, actually, I did not write the brief. The brief was written by...
You signed the brief, though, didn't you?
Correct. I signed the brief.
When you sign a brief, you're testifying to the court that everything in it is true, right?
Yes.
Okay. So they're your words in terms of the court, right?
Well, you're correct, Senator Kennedy. Okay. I would never sign...
Tell me what you meant by assault weapons.
So I am not a gun expert, and at the time, that brief, I think, was about 10 years...
You were giving the court advice about, say, ban assault weapons. What is... You told the court you were an expert. Just tell me what you wanted to ban.
Senator, sitting here today, as I said, I did not write that brief. I was local counsel.
Sign the brief.
I understand. At the time...
Tell me what you wanted to ban. That's all I want to know, Judge.
I don't remember the exact definition of assault weapons in the ordinance that was at issue.
So you submitted a brief to an appellate brief, you signed it, and you don't know what, and you said abolish assault weapons, and you don't know what you wanted them to abolish?
Senator, at the time that I signed the brief, I read the brief because our Supreme Court required an Illinois bar member to sign the brief. I was not responsible for researching the content.
You were responsible for the brief.
Absolutely, absolutely. And sitting here today, I do not remember the characteristics of that were cited in the ordinance for the assault weapons ban. It's not an area of practice that I have specialized in. I'm sure 10 years ago I could have answered your question.
And
but
Judge,
sitting here today,
you think you deserve to be promoted? with this record?
Senator, I stand by my record. I stand by my record.
Senator Butler.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Congratulations to you and your